On today's show, it is an absolute celebration because the Bucks have clinched another division title, and we are that fired up about that. So we're going to talk about everything that's going on in the standings right now. The Bucks got some help, maybe not just from the Boston Celtics, but an interesting Cleveland Cavaliers result that may come into calculations as well. So we're going to bring the latest as well as the injury report before a back-to-back against the Pacers and then the Celtics. And then I've got some questions about Jon Horst, big picture stuff. Do we think that Jon Horst gets enough credit for the teams he's put together the last few years? Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Bucks. My name's Kane Pittman. You can see and hear me on this show Monday to Friday, and also find my work at ESPN. Alongside me, we've got the triple threat back in town. Camille Davis, who, by the way, has just wrapped up the Tech Foul podcast. She's on double duty tonight, which we'd love to see. And from the Bucks Radio Network, Justin Garcia back, as always, getting himself ready for a back-to-back over the next couple of nights. Very, very busy times if you're on this nightly radio schedule. So Justin's been killing it over there. So we're going to break down what happened tonight around the NBA, what it means for the Bucks, and then get into some Jon Horst chat. Today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Basketball GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NBA GM and managing your basketball franchise, this is definitely the game for you. Download the game by visiting ultimatebasketballgm.com or look it up in the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in the game store, app store, or on the website there. So go check that out. As always, we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first watch or listen every single day. We appreciate the support and we appreciate the conversation that is started, particularly in the YouTube channel. So it's free to do and it helps us out big time. Subscribe, drop a like, drop a comment, follow, all those little things that you can do to help us. It helps grow the show. And we think it's going to be a pretty busy month, a couple of months here for Locked On Bucks, and we're pretty excited about it. Starting tomorrow, when the Bucks and the Pacers play. Now, Camille, I just went for a swim. I was swimming some laps. I'm like Ian Thorpe in the pool right now. And then when I get out of the pool, I am stunned by the development that the Washington Wizards have done us a solid. Long live the Washington Wizards. They've beaten the Boston Celtics really in a game that was not close at all. And if you look at the standings right now and what that means, the Bucks now 3 games up in the loss column, 2.5 game gap with only 7 to play. This is a great result for the Bucks if you're desperate to have that number 1 seed.
Absolutely. And the thing that's even more interesting about that is we heard Grayson Allen's comment saying, like, we want the 1 seed. And then I saw an article in The Athletic coming out with the Celtics saying, we want the number 1 seed. Like, they're also gunning for it. So knowing that the Celtics prize the number 1 seed, they also, Jaylen Brown was in the article talking about it's more important how the team is playing. But Malcolm Brogdon was like, no, we want the number 1 seed. So it's interesting to know as well, like they're going for it. And for them to lose to the Wizards, it's unexpected. Very, very unexpected. While we were recording Technical Foul tonight, my co-host Eric pointed out the fact, he's like, at this moment, the Wizards are winning. And we all were like, yeah, let's go Wizards. Let's go Wizards. To come home and then to see like that Wizards actually pulled that off, led seemingly most of the game, like you mentioned, wasn't that close. I can't believe it. The Wizards were shorthanded as well. So to beat the Celtics right now, it's unexpected, but it's a gift that I will take. I will take that gift. Anything that can help move the Bucks up in the standings and secure the number 1 spot without any Bucks players having to play, that's a big win in my book.
And Porzingis was on absolute fire, Justin. We've seen him play pretty well against the Bucks actually a few weeks ago. But anyway, this is an unexpected result. We've seen this happen with the Bucks. Last week, they unexpectedly lost to the Pacers, a team that they are going to play tomorrow. If we go through the injury report, does this change anything for you with the way you approach this? And I say that carefully because I know for a fact there's going to be people in the YouTube comments that are going to be angry that I'm even suggesting this. And they're going to say, no. You put your foot down. You play this back-to-back, but they have got the Boston Celtics in a game that, you know, if you win, if you're the Bucks, that is a bigger swing game than any really on the road here to the postseason, given what it would do for both teams. Giannis is probable. Goran Dragic is probable. Hopefully he's feeling okay after that 9 minutes yesterday. Joe Ingles is questionable. and Chris Middleton questionable as well. We'll see what they do with those two on the back-to-back. I guess the other news is Jay Crowder is out. He didn't play much yesterday, so they're going to probably continue to manage him. No Drew Holiday on the injury report. Does that mean anything? Will that change tomorrow? We'll wait and see. But does this change anything with the way you approach this front end of the back-to-back in the game against Indiana?
Well, I would assume Drew Holiday plays, if not being listed, and just given what we assume it was for his personal reasons and why he was out.
You would think they would at least put him questionable if if it was a concern.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way I feel, but who knows?
Yeah. But no, it doesn't change anything for me. And I think what we saw against the Pistons, I know Drew was out for separate reasons, but it seemed like it was, we know Detroit has zero incentive to win this game. We quite frankly should win, even if Giannis and a few others sit. So that was kind of your rest. It doesn't change anything. If anything, it makes it even more urgent that you win these two games, because Indiana's in an interesting spot. You mentioned they beat the Bucks, 10 days ago, but the Pacers are also a team that has next to no incentive to win. I know they are not officially eliminated, but for all intents and purposes, they're eliminated from the playoffs. Even the Wizards, with their showing tonight, it's still going to take a lot for the Wizards to catch the Bulls for that 10th seed in the East. And we saw the Pacers on their injury report. Halliburton is still out. I think Duarte's out. Turner was listed as questionable. None of those guys played against the Mavs the other night, so they've been resting guys. And these two games, if you're the Bucks, if you take care of business in these two games, you're basically the 1 seed, because at that point it's going to be 4 games on the Celtics, I think would be the margin, with the loss with the tiebreaker. So essentially 5 with 6 to play, it would be over. So I think it's, if we put our foot on the gas and just play to win these 2 games, it's going to be almost like going into the bubble where the Bucks had that 8-game lead, and you basically needed to win 1 game to secure the 1 seed. You could potentially treat the last week as such. If you win these 2 games, you're basically the 1 seed and would just have to win one of your final games to secure that, or have the Celtics lose one.
And it will be interesting because, as many people have pointed out or would obviously be aware of, now you have the play-in tournament as well. So you do get a little bit of a breather on the back end of the regular season anyway. So I don't know. I don't know how they're going to approach this. But to me, I kind of agree with you, Justin. I'm just saying, well, let's not worry. The Celtics slipped up tonight. That's fine. But if we just decide that we're going to mess around with it, we can slip up as well. And then all of a sudden you've got a very, very big game again against the Celtics on the back end of a back-to-back. So I think first and foremost, take care of business here. Giannis didn't play the other night, so I actually kind of just expect or suspect he's going to play both of these games. And the Bucks are going to try and get both of them as you manage. The other interesting watch, Camille, has been Philadelphia. And I kind of didn't really notice this until Frank brought it up on the podcast yesterday, but the Cavs just lost a tight one to Atlanta, which was actually is obviously the reason why the Bucks were able to clinch the division and hang the banner whenever they're going to do that. They'll probably hang the banner before the Celtics game, and everyone will be real fired up and juiced up about another banner up there. They're racking up the Central Division titles. But now there's 2 games gap between Philadelphia and Cleveland, so it snuck up on me, but there was actually, I guess, some chance that the Cavs could jump ahead of the Sixers, and then that would mean interesting things for the second round while we've been focusing on this potential Boston-Philly series. So happy to see the Cavs lose as well, Camille, and all around on an off night for the Bucks. You got to say things went as well as they could have.
Yeah, because my whole thing with the chase for the 1 seed was that I didn't want it to come at the cost of their health of the guys. So again, being able to make up ground and extend the space between the Bucks and the Boston and Philly and Cleveland on a night where you're not even playing, that's the ultimate win right there at this point in the season. So love to hear that. And listening to yesterday's pod was my first time also hearing when Frank mentioned maybe, Philly drops down to 4 and maybe that's something in their plan. Personally, I think playing around with seeding in that way is a dangerous, dangerous game. I would not recommend for anyone to do that. I mean, especially the Bucks. I shouldn't be worried about what Philly and Boston and Cleveland do in that regard, but it's a dangerous game when you start playing around trying to lose games on purpose because you want a certain seeding. And then at the bottom half of this standings right now, I know Washington they're 2.5 games out from Chicago. and they have 6 or 7 games left to play at this point. So like, it's possible Washington can sneak in, maybe not likely, but it's still possible at this point. So like, you don't even know exactly how that bottom is going to shape out exactly. Is it really worth playing around in that way for something that might not even, bend your way? So like, going 4-5, do you really want New York that bad at this point? What if Brooklyn takes over it at a 5 spot before the season? Like, it's just too many different balls in the air. So I wouldn't recommend going that route. But again, for the Bucks, this is all good news. And I would agree. Just let's get it out the way. Let's try to win the next couple of games, especially knowing that we're going to be seeing Boston on the back end of a back-to-back, while Boston is seeing us on the front end of a back-to-back. So if we win against the Pacers and then we win against the Celtics, it's going to put the Celtics in an interesting position themselves, because it's like, what do you do on your back-to-back now going forward, depending on how far that gap might be between the two teams.
Yeah, and I think that's why both teams are going to try, because the Celtics will probably enter this game feeling like, all right, this is our last shot. If we don't win this game, maybe it's time to call off the dogs a little bit and see what happens here over the last week. We're going to get to the Jon Horst chat, because I do want to ask a pretty simple question. Do we think Jon Horst gets enough credit, not enough credit, or appropriate credit? So we're going to get to the Jon Horst chat in a bit. But we also do kind of need to take a look at the bottom end of the Eastern Conference playoff seedings and what teams are in the mix. I'm curious which teams you guys would want to see, and if there is any team that you wouldn't want to see, because the Bucks actually have some tricky history with some of those teams that are floating around as potential first-round matchups. And Justin is shrugging his shoulders. He's disgusted by that comment. So we'll get to that in just a little bit. But the Ultimate Pro Basketball GM is the coolest game I've played in a while. And I don't play many games, and I don't get hooked on many games. But this one is pretty interesting, because you are able to put yourself in the seat of a GM. We're going to talk about Jon Horst later, but you can be Jon Horst, and you can make your own moves. You have to deal with the personalities of the players, and we know that could be difficult at times. We're fortunate in Milwaukee, not so much the case, but you have to also hire coaches and assistants, trade players, train players, and navigate the franchise through free agency. So you get to really be in the driver's seat, which is a pretty fun stuff. So Locked On Bucks listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in the game store. So make sure to check it out. To download the game, just visit probasketballgm.com. Scan the code on the YouTube screen right now if you're watching us on that platform, or look it up on the app stores. That's probasketballgm.com. Ultimate Basketball GM. Start your dynasty today. So if I pull up the standings right here in the Eastern Conference, Washington, thanks for your services tonight, but I'm going to rule you out.
Yeah.
So I'm asking the question about Brooklyn, currently in the 6th seed. They're half a game ahead of Miami, who slipped up tonight against the Toronto Raptors. So let's just say Brooklyn, Miami, Atlanta, Toronto, Chicago. Any of those teams keeping you up at night, Justin?
No. And,
oh, no. Jeez.
I mean, I guess the team that I would say would be least fun to play would be Brooklyn, just because I don't think if I'm any team, you would expect to beat Brooklyn if you're one of the top 3 seeds, but it's not going to be fun to play them because they're going to shoot, and they have a lot of 3-and-D guys that they can throw out there on the perimeter, especially a team like Boston that has those wings. Brooklyn has guys that can throw out and defend them. Boston still has better wings, but it's just not going to be a fun matchup. And those are the opponents Philadelphia struggles with. So a Philly-Brooklyn first-round series would be very interesting to watch. But, we've said all along the Bucks and the Celtics have felt like the 2 best teams in the league. So when you look at those standings, the Heat are just not a good team. And there is no offense there. You can talk about, hey, they can muck it up and make this a defensive game. It is nowhere near as good a version of the Heat as the team the Bucks beat in the first round a couple of years ago. The Hawks have been a disaster all season long. There's no defense there, and the offense isn't quite as potent as it once was. And same with the Raptors. In the version of that team we've seen a handful of times, it's something that the Bucks should not struggle with in a playoff setting. So none of those teams, really 6 through 10, are ones where you think, man, this could be worrisome in a first-round series. I guess I would add whoever gets to the 6 is going to be the interesting part, I guess, just to see can they make it tough? We assume it's going to be Philly in a first-round matchup there. Again, we would pick Philly to win against any of those teams, but you would look at it and say, man, could they take them to 5 or 6 games and make this a challenging series going into hopefully a second-round series with the Celtics?
So the interesting thing is that if you're asking me and you speak about that series with Philly, just for the spice and perhaps the drama, Miami, Philadelphia has some stuff. Yeah. Jimmy Butler will be there. PJ Tucker, I don't know if he's offended about not getting the contract or whatever it is. That there'll be some stuff going on. There'll be some push and shove, some tension at least. But Camille,
well, Brooklyn too. There's history there.
Well, that is very true. Brooklyn without Ben Simmons, though, I mean, that's a big blow, isn't it?
He'll be there in spirit.
Well, probably not. So if we look at these teams, Camille, and I admire Justin's optimism, there's no doubt about that. I love it. And I am actually, as a rule, everyone that listens to this show would know that I'm an optimist, perhaps annoyingly to everyone that I'm always so positive. But when it comes to postseason, I do have this, you get this deep-seated anxiety that what if something goes wrong? And I think the Bucks would beat all these teams, so they should. But Miami and Toronto, there's enough history there that I'm like, what do you have any pause, Camille, when you look at those two teams?
Only in the sense of we have a history with them, but not in the sense of I think that they could beat the Bucks at this point. Anything can happen. We know that. But one thing that I've always loved about the NBA's playoff format, 7 best out of 7. So the better team generally comes out of the series with the win, unless something catastrophic happens, which, knock on wood, I'm hoping does not happen with the Bucks. So when I look at the standings, if the Bucks are the team that I believe that they are, and that they've shown themselves to be throughout this regular season, they shouldn't have too big of a problem, even with Miami or Toronto, with the history that we have. I think a lot of that would be just mental, but the Bucks already broke through that mental ceiling with Miami when they beat them on the way to the finals. And as for Toronto, it just hasn't earled right ever since Kawhi left.
It's not the same Toronto, yeah.
It's not the same Toronto team anymore. So concerns, not too many. Bring them on. I've said that the whole way, even before when I was talking about getting the 2 seed or 3, just roll out the basketball and let's hoop. And I think the Bucks will win their first round matchup. It might be a gentleman's sweep with some of those teams, but I don't have any doubt that the Bucks could win any of those matchups.
Honestly, and it's not concern per se, but my feeling that it seems like you're hinting at of hesitation of are we sure it would be in the second round with Cleveland? Because by the numbers, Cleveland has been one of the 2 best teams in basketball for months now when you look at point differential and net rating and their defense, and it seems like they've been the afterthought. I think we would all pick the Bucks to win, but that's the one to me where you have the hesitation of they'll win, but are we sure that's the easy series?
Yeah, well, out of all those teams, and once you get to the second round, you expect it's going to be difficult. Of course, we've focused on Boston and Philadelphia all year, but the one thing that Cleveland does have going for them, which is scary in a postseason series, is that they've got a guy that can drop 60. So, there's various challenges with Cleveland, but Donovan Mitchell obviously can go off and just win a game himself. I'm just going to go on the record and say that I don't really want to play Toronto. I'm not saying the Bucks would lose, but I discussed this with Frank, and you talk about Brooklyn having some pieces that are versatile. I still, and I've watched enough Toronto, I still can't figure out why they're not better. They've got really good players, and
none of those players score is the problem.
Yeah, maybe, and Siakam historically has struggled against the Bucks as well. They're able to slow him down, but I don't know, man. That's a tricky team if they end up as an 8
of all those teams you listed. Miami or Atlanta to me seem like the obvious choice. If you could choose one, who would you want to play? It would be one of those 2.
Yep, that's fair. And obviously I think the Bucks would beat the Bulls, but you already know before the series starts, even if the Bucks sweep the Bulls, you got to put up with DeMar DeRozan putting up 65 points a night. So, and we've seen that for years and years and years and years. All right, let's get to the Jon Horst question. Is he rated appropriately, underrated, overrated? We'll get to that after we talk about FanDuel, because the NCAA tournaments are heading up. In fact, they're getting to their conclusion. So there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. That's because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Hard to believe. But just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up today to claim your no-sweat first bet. I've been going through some of the awards that the Bucks might be a part of. Defensive Player of the Year. This has been shifting back and forth the last few weeks. Brook Lopez still the favorite there at -170. Jaren Jackson Jr., the second favorite. And it seems like it's out of those two. But Bam Adebayo, Giannis are right there as well. Anthony Davis. Come on, FanDuel. But anyway, you can go to FanDuel, the sports book there, to check it all out. And it's all on the app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. I was looking at this roster, and I think that there's been a thought, and people have asked me, and we've loosely discussed it. Is this the deepest Bucks team in the Bud era? I think it's a hard question to answer because they've won a title. So even though that team wasn't that deep, they went through and won a title. So you can look at the roster and say, okay, on paper, this team looks great. The team generally has always looked great in the regular season, though, but we'll see how all these pieces fit in the postseason. So I just find it a tough question to answer now. You can feel differently about it. But I did listen to Jon Horst had a conversation with Russillo last week on the podcast. Check it out. I thought it was interesting. Maybe to some people it wasn't, but I liked it. And the thing that I really liked was when he was asked the question about the Jrue Holiday trade and how much Giannis not signing the extension at that point played into it. And, sometimes you listen to these interviews and you'll hear people go and they'll play it down and go, no, we just made a trade. We wanted to do what's best for the franchise. I like the fact that Horst just said, yeah, that was the main driver. We understood where we're at as a franchise. And for everything Giannis has done, you just want to make this guy happy and prove that you can put a contender on the floor. Justin, I know that seems like such an obvious thing, but I think overall, the one thing that when we look at this team, and you can separate it because the tax stuff is owners versus GM, the GM should always want to have the best players on the roster. So I don't blame Jon Horst for some of the financial stuff that might frustrate fans. But I just think we're at the point now where it's kind of just lost in the shuffle that he has consistently made trades, consistently made moves to at least put this team in the best possible situation they can be, given that they've had very, very limited assets.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing that he's done is this just ability to make these moves. And it's been year after year where it seems like a name pops up and you always think, well, that'd be great, but I just don't see how it's possible. Like go back to the PJ Tucker thing and realize we got PJ Tucker for DJ Augustine and picks that we gave up. Everything, even I know it didn't work out, but Nikola Mirotic, that was another name that sort of surfaced early on. He thought, well, that'd be great to have that guy coming off the bench, but I don't see how we could do it. 4 second-round draft picks that get him. And now Jay Crowder, the worst-kept secret in the league for, 5 months? And you start to think the longer it goes on, I don't know, like there's going to be somebody else with an offer that's more than what the Bucks can give, especially when you start to hear Phoenix isn't interested in what these offers are. And then lo and behold, the Bucks come up with Jay Crowder. So the fact that he's able to constantly make these moves with limited resources at best. But I think the big thing that you kind of touched on too is when you have a guy like Giannis, it is not as easy as it seems to just constantly surround that player with the type of pieces that you need. I mean, look back in history for the last decade at teams that are in a similar spot to the Bucks going into Giannis's free agency and how that's worked out for him. I mean, the Cavs, they made moves. They weren't necessarily great moves when they had LeBron James early, and maybe that ultimately led to LeBron leaving. You look at Oklahoma City with that group that they had. They broke it up earlier than you would contend they needed to. The Warriors are kind of the different one where they hit it big with some draft picks that helped them initially, and they surrounded them with the right pieces, but also they had owners that said, we don't care what it costs, we'll spend and go into the tax. It's just not normal to see guys that you're able to make these moves, I should say, to surround them with the right pieces. You can make moves. They're not always the right moves, and they don't always work out, especially immediately. And I mean, it's what we're going through or about to go through with Dallas as well for the next year or two of what happened here. So he deserves an immense amount of credit for not only showing the willingness to make these moves. Ownership spending money too is something that has to be pointed out for these last 2 years. But Jon Horst just constantly pushing the right buttons and getting these moves where it's like, hey, go get this player. Yeah, that'd be great if we could have it. I don't see how it happens. And then a month or two later, you find a way to make that deal happen.
Yeah, I just look back at it, and to me, the calling card for what has made Jon Horst successful in this job so far. I mean, first of all, it's okay to walk in and you got the superstar there. I mean, that's the number one thing that every GM would love when they walk into the job. But we know it was messy when he got this job, and I think a lot of us were sitting back and thinking, I don't know what's going on here. But there you got this super young guy that's taken over this role. It doesn't seem like he was near the top of anyone's list, and it was just a fallback. Let's give him the job at a really dangerous time for the direction of the franchise. And even immediately, if you go back and being able to flip terrible contracts like the John Henson, the Daly, and bring in, a George Hill and a few different pieces that help this team be successful straight away, he must be a super, super savvy guy when it comes to discussing trades and relationships around the league, because I think that's been his calling card, getting these deals done all the way back then that have been big time. Now, he's going to be judged harshly, I would imagine, based on what happens this offseason, and it's about to get perhaps as challenging as it's ever been. But obviously it's okay in hindsight, Camille, because we look at it and say, well, okay, well, they won a title. The Drew Holiday trade is always going to be successful in my eyes. But that also took some serious guts at that point in time to say, well, I don't know really what Giannis is doing. Hopefully this gets him over the line, but I'm going to throw all these draft picks for the next 6, 7, 8 years on the table. And if it doesn't work out, he doesn't have a job. Now you might sit back and say, well, if it doesn't work out and then you lose Giannis, the team's going to stink anyway, so he'd probably lose his job. So it was an easy move to make. But I don't know. I think he does deserve credit for going all in and making every single move, no matter what the assets need to be pushed in.
I agree with that. And I agree with both points that you made as well as Justin made, because one thing about Jon Horst that I've always enjoyed about him in his role is that if he does make a signing and he realizes this is not for the benefit of the team, he finds a way to get out of it. Like he doesn't let pride or ego come in his way of like, well, that was my guy and that was my pick and that's how it's going to stay. It's like, this isn't working. Let me try to find a trade partner or another way to get off this contract and bring in an asset that I think could actually help the team. And I mean, just looking at the free agency history, all of them weren't hits for sure, but the ones that hit, they're still here. Your Brook Lopez, your Pat Connaughton, like these are some big signings that the Bucks have made. And again, getting from under contracts, like 2 DJs for a PJ is something I will always be like, how did you do this? Like, it does not make sense to me. Even when we had Shimmy Ojale and Rodney Hood, it's like, that's not working either. I had to give up Dante, which is a point for Bucks fans that some are like, we wish we had Dante still on the team, but like, you got to give and take a little bit with that and bringing in. We understand the logic behind the move. And now Serge Ibaka is not part of this team. And Serge Ibaka was a piece that helped us acquire Jay Crowder. So like, he's always making these moves and trying to make any wrong that he does seem to make right, which is something that I really appreciate about Horst and the way that he got GMs this team.
And along those lines too, even some of the little moves, which kind of surprised some of us at the time. But then when you looked at it, you thought, I wonder if this is a precursor to something like George Hill coming back, when we thought, oh, wow, I thought he was going to move on or retire, and Serge Ibaka as well. And then as you examine it, you're like, well, even if this doesn't work out, those are pretty nice contracts to at least give you trade pieces. And again, you have to be willing to spend the money. The other thing too is, there's been this talk of what the Bucks do with those resources, and well, they're not developing any young guys, which is true. But that's also the position that they're in. And I think what we've really seen is there is no such thing as 2 timelines. As much as the Warriors tried to present that, it wasn't 2 timelines. It was Steph Curry being Steph Curry and Klay Thompson coming back last year that led them to the title. So it's great in theory. It's almost impossible to pull off. So if you're going to mortgage the future, you have to get value out of that. And that's what the Bucks have done much better the last couple of years.
Yeah, the Warriors quickly moved on from a number 2 overall pick, which Bucks fans know all about that. The drafting stuff is fascinating. As Camille pointed, that Dante's not here, so I could see how people get frustrated about that. I think we all generally like the Marjon Beauchamp pick. We'll see how that plays out, more so next year.
And also, if you're going to mention Dante, you do have to bring up the second round picks that you got, which allowed you to get Jay Crowder this year.
Yep.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating to see. But obviously this year with the Crowder one throwing in the 5 picks, but over the last 12 months, you bring in Javon Carter, who was just out there. You commit to Joe Ingles, and we'll see what it looks like in the postseason. But certainly from a regular season standpoint, I think he's been an excellent addition. And I think, honestly, surprised a lot of Bucks fans out there, and that perhaps either hadn't watched a lot of Joe or weren't sure what he could do because of the age and the injury stuff, which makes perfect sense to me. So I'm curious to know what the fans think. I know that coaches, front offices, ownership heavily criticized a lot of the time, but how do you look back on Jon Horst, and let us know in the YouTube comments whether you think he does get enough credit, or you still got something that you're really annoyed about that's happened over the last few years. Let us know, because I will say this, Justin, it doesn't feel like the Bucks. It doesn't feel like that's a part of the Bucks organization that gets spoken about.
That gets the credit. No, I agree with that. It's Giannis. It's Drew
enough,
Holiday recently.
Yeah.
This year it's been Brooke, and then you get to eventually Bud. You have the reluctant Bucks fans and national media that are out there and occasionally will recognize Chris, but it's never Jon Horst that gets mentioned. And I think, maybe the legacy, I think we all agree on this. I'm not saying every move he's made is great and the players have whoa, he's been incredible. But for the most part, the legacy for Jon Horst is these moves have worked out better than you would think. And you mentioned the criticisms. I mean, nobody thought Bobby Portis was going to be all that good. The Pat Connaughton move was lambasted when they signed him initially. Joe Ingles in this offseason, everybody wanted TJ Warren, and look how that's worked out. And are we sure about this guy? So all of these moves have worked out better than we anticipated at the time.
All right, Camille, it's time for you to rest the voice. Back-to-back podcasts. Yes, the fatigue has to be setting in. There's no doubt about it. What were you talking about this week, just quickly?
We went over Lamar Jackson and how the NFL seems like it's colluding against him at this point. Aaron Rodgers and the trade talks being held up, and what's holding those up at this point. NBA, we talked about the standings. Eric made a pretty good case for Giannis's MVP case this year, and he cited the 1962 MVP race as a nice example for us to take a look back at in retrospect and compare it to this one. I gave Chris Middleton some love. I'm wearing the 22 today. And our Lakers fan on the pod actually said that he felt like the team was playing better without LeBron, which led to us having an entire conversation around some delusions that Laker fans have around
Anthony
LeBron.
Davis would agree. He told him, hey, I got this with or without LeBron.
Yeah, it was a fun show. And then we ended previewing WrestleMania.
Oh, nice. All right. Go check that out. Tech Foul Podcast. Always worth a listen every week as well. Once you're done with Locked On Bucks, of course. Check out the Locked On Game to Game podcast as well on your Locked On NBA feed. Get your stats, news, info, analysis, scores, everything going on around the NBA on a nightly basis with the help and expertise and professionalism of the hosts from around the Locked On network. All right, let's wrap this up. This has been good, but let us know how you're feeling about the next two nights, Pacers and Celtics, the results tonight. If you want to just jump into YouTube comments and express your love for the Washington Wizards tonight, feel free to do that. And then let us know about Jon Horst. And it doesn't have to be all positive. Feel free to tell us what we missed out on that conversation. We appreciate the feedback. All right, we'll be back. A couple of post-game pods coming up the next few days, which we're looking forward to as things just start to get a little bit serious.